Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start. This is our February 5th council work session, and we will begin with an invocation by Reverend Dr. Christopher Sacarias from John Wesley AMEZ Church. Please stand as you're able.
Council members, would you bow your heads for a moment of prayer? In honor and respect of all faith traditions, to spiritual disciplines and practices of spirituality, we're thankful for the opportunity to work towards the common good of all humanity. And now may the wisdom and the peace that would help us to work together in love and in unity fall fresh upon us, that we may continually be better, wiser, and lovers of all people. We offer this. May this be acceptable prayer to all of us. Amen.
Thank you so much for that prayer. And I will actually start the proclamations by recognizing Chinese Lunar New Year. So all of you who are here for this wonderful occasion, please come forward.
Just right around here.
Good morning, everybody. Let me begin by saying Xin Yan Kuai Lo, Gong Xi Fa Tai. And that's about all the Chinese that I do know, according also to Councilmember Katz. But that says, hello all, wishing you a happy and prosperous new year. And we are here very excited to celebrate the Lunar New Year. As we all know, this is a county that is a proud home of so many different communities. We have all come here to begin a new journey and to make contributions to this extraordinary county, state, and country. And so one of the most wonderful things and aspects of our county is that we make space so that everybody can continue to celebrate and can continue to pass on traditions to their children and grandchildren while recognizing the totality of who we are as human beings and as residents of this world. So today is one very exciting opportunity to celebrate such a tradition, and I will read this proclamation, and then I will make sure that everybody has an opportunity to introduce yourself as well as make some comments. And at the end, I am going to invite my colleagues to join us for the traditional photograph that will memorialize this extraordinary opportunity and this very momentous occasion. The County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland proclaims, whereas the Asian American community represents more than 15% of the population in Montgomery County, and whereas Asian Americans enhance the quality of life for Montgomery County through their contributions to every professional field, and whereas the Lunar New Year is one of the most important and widely celebrated holidays for many Asian Americans, especially those of Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese descent, marking a time of reunion, renewal, and celebration. And whereas the Lunar New Year is observed by a great number of Montgomery County residents and affords others the opportunity to celebrate Asian culture, customs, and traditions. And whereas February 5th, 2019 marks the beginning of the year 4717 in the lunar calendar, which will be celebrated as the year of the pig, and I'm told is the golden pig, so this is an amazingly wonderful, prosperous year. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland, hereby acknowledges February 5th, 2019 as Lunar New Year Day in Montgomery County and recognizes the contributions that Asian Americans make to our community. Signed this 5th day of February in the year 2019 by myself, Nancy Navarro, as Council President. And so I do have copies for everybody, but first, how about if you introduce yourselves?
We have community leaders from the cross sections of Asian American community. We have Mr. Stan Tsai, who is the former president of CCACC, and the current co-chair of the Coalition of Asian Pacific American Democrats of Maryland. Elena Lee, president of the Montgomery County Korean American Association. Mr. Jung-Kun Choi, president of Korean American Senior Citizens Association of Maryland. And the Hon Dang, former president of the Vietnamese Mutual Association of Montgomery County or Maryland, and the former candidate of county council member, and the Matthew Lee, president of the Kobe Government Contracting Alliance, and the current elected member of the Democratic Central Committee and the CEO of the Fastech Corporation. And Dr. Hyun-Suk Choi is the chair of the board of the Yeongnam Foundation, and the Sheena Kim is the executive vice president of the Montgomery County Korean American Association, and Myung-Ah Kim is the president of the Korean American Veterans Association, and Mr. Niping Fang is Dr. Niping Fang is the former president of the Coalition Council of Chinese American Organizations, which is umbrella organization for about over 60 organizations of Chinese Americans from different provinces of the from China. And the Mr. Bo Sun is the current president of the Union of Chinese American Professional Associations, which is also umbrella association for over 34 organizations. And I like Mr. Dr. Bo Sun to give 30 second, 30 second,
Okay, Judge Park.
30-second quick statement, but I just want to thank County Council for always supporting Asian American community, and especially Council President Nancy Navarro, who has always been with us. And I want to let the community know that we are very grateful.
Thank you,
Dr.
Judge.
Wilson.
Yes, please.
Good morning. Thanks very much for the County Council give us so much support to recognize today is a Chinese New Year and a Lunar New Year. We appreciate this country. They give us so much opportunity to help us to grow, to make American dream. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, I think that
We let Mr. Hong Deng, who represents the Vietnamese American community.
Sure. Lifelong resident of Montgomery County, so I'm very proud to be a county that appreciates diversity. So I just want to wish everyone a happy new year filled with much health, happiness, and prosperity.
wonderful. Thank you so much.
Last and the least, that the Korean American community, Elena.
This is unexpected. You know what? I'm going to say thank you so much for all your support, and hopefully we continue to do a great job for all of us in Montgomery County. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Just one addition, our godfather of all the AAPI community, Judge Pat.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to join me and join the group for the photo. And I will give you this, Judge Park, and then we will. Yes.
All right, and if we can make 2 lines with everyone, please, so we can get everyone in the photo. Yes. Taller people in the back, please. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Yes, thank you, Crystal. Yes.
Less good looking, more stressed, less charming. What else we got?
And I'm assuming you're talking about yourself, right? To start a fist bump.
Maya will try to
We love New Year celebrations. So now we will continue with a proclamation recognizing the 2018 Milken Award recipient for Maryland, Brian Quinn from East Silver Spring Elementary School. Recognition by Councilmember Reamer and Councilmember Rice.
All right, this is an exciting moment. We're here to recognize an outstanding teacher who I think the teacher would agree, Brian would agree, that this award, while it's being conferred upon you by the Milken Institute, is in recognition of all the great teaching of Montgomery County Public Schools and the systems that attract and support the best teachers that I hope you'll find anywhere. And you're exemplary of what we do when we do our best, and we thank you for your dedication and your commitment. And this award is it's a national award. So I'm here joined by Brian and Principal Morrow, former Principal Morrow, Dr. Morrow, who was with East Silver Spring for 10 years and has recently taken on a leadership role supporting principals across the system. Is that right? So very excited about that, and of course the chairman of the Education Committee. I'd like to just ask, Craig and I are doing this together, so I'm going to pass the mic to him and let him say his comments, and then we'll read the proclamation.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Hans. And Brian, congratulations to you for being a great example of what we see throughout MCPS. Adults who are dedicated to making sure that our children can be whatever it is that they want to be. And that truly is the spirit of what this Milken Award is about. It's really about thinking outside the box and coming up with creative ways in which you can continue to reach your students and make sure that they can excel. And you are a shining example to be held up for all of the teachers in our system about what we need to continue to do each and every day to make our system even better for all of our kids. And so I just want to say a heartfelt thank you as a parent of students within MCPS. Even though my kids don't go to your school, I know that people like you make our system better. And that's what this is about. It truly is about making sure that we can continue to provide even better opportunities for our kids. And then also, on behalf of the entire school system, and we have our president of the Board of Education, Shevra Evans, that's here. We have leadership from MCPS. It really is something to where, for me, it's a highlight of the great opportunities that we have within our system to take ourselves to the next level. And again, by winning this award, you certainly show and exemplify for not just folks in Montgomery County, but throughout the state, what we can do when it comes to taking education to the next level. So congratulations to you, sir.
Thank you so much. And it's Diane Morris with MCPS. Thank you. I had to ask the president of the Board of Education. I'm sorry. But this one's a little personal. Of course, this is my community, but one of the great people who works with me, Jason Fasto, you taught his daughter in 4th grade, and I think you even coach a little softball with him as well. So I have to say, he wrote this. He put his heart into it, which I think every parent does. You know, there's a special place in a parent's heart for the people who teach their children and who really are helping raise their children, right? We just feel so much passion and appreciation and gratitude and love for teachers. So I think some of that is reflected here. But I'd like to ask Shebra, would you care to share any comment about the awardee? Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to tell Mr. Quinn on behalf of the school board, thank you so much. Teachers play a huge role in our students' lives. And as Mr. Reamer said, I'm a parent as well. And so with math, that's something that we use, our students will use every day in their life. And you've taken your passion and you've passed that on to our students. And so that will forever stay with them. And I just appreciate all your hard work and continued success.
Thank you, Shebra. All right. So whereas, for 30 years, the Milken Educator Awards, an initiative of the Milken Family Foundation, has rewarded and inspired excellence in the world of education by honoring top educators for their impressive achievements, and more significantly, for the promise of what they will accomplish in the future. And
whereas Brian Quinn has been a Montgomery County Public School teacher for 11 years and is currently the 4th grade math teacher at East Silver Spring Elementary School and is known as a master relationship builder whose personality and confidence always conveys his dedication to all of his students. And
whereas Mr. Quinn is described as analytical and caring, and he utilizes extensive data to shape his lessons and adapts his instruction to make sure all students are reached by incorporating board and computer games, sports, and group work to engage students and make math seem less daunting to those who otherwise might shy away from the subject. And
whereas Mr. Quinn leads weekly math intervention groups, which have helped 70% of his students reach proficiency on math assessments. And he mentors interns from nearby universities, volunteers as a coach for Girls on the Run and girls softball, and is a skilled shortstop on the East Silver Spring Elementary Schools Teachers League kickball team. I smell a challenge between the council and East Silver Spring coming soon. And is a willing regular participant in the dunk tank at the school's annual carnival. And
yeah, we run for office. That's our dunk tank. Whereas in 2018, Mr. Quinn was one of only 40 educators nationwide to receive the Milken Educator Award and the only recipient in the state of Maryland. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland, thereby honors Brian Quinn as a recipient of the 2018 Milken Educator Award and recognizes his contributions to Montgomery County through his dedication to his students presented today. Mr. Quinn, would you care to say a few words with us today?
I just want to say thank you. There's tons of amazing teachers in Montgomery County, and it's an honor to be taking the time out today to be honored. So thank you very much.
There you are. Thank you, Brian. We're so proud of you and so grateful to your work and to all of our fantastic MCPS leaders. So thank you. We'll now take a photo. So if you'd like to rise behind, and we will take a photo.
Excellent recognition. Now we have a proclamation recognizing the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce 60th anniversary by Councilmember Friedson.
I've also asked my colleagues on the Fed committee to join me up here, Councilmember Jawando and Councilmember Reamer. And we have members of the Chamber of Commerce. Happy anniversary. So local businesses are the lifeblood of our economy. I think we all know that. These are the folks who are paying the wages for our families to be able to live the quality of life that they do, who are supporting our nonprofits to do the type of incredible work in our communities that they do, and that are paying the tax revenues to support the services that we all care so deeply about here in Montgomery County. And so I am just so touched and honored to be able to recognize our outstanding Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce for all the advocacy they do for the folks who do so much for our community. I was at a briefing yesterday dealing with federal contracting. We have 3,500 federal contractors in Montgomery, in the state of Maryland, many of which are in Montgomery County. 1/3 of them are small businesses, and we had it was one of the many programs that the chamber does throughout the year that provides so much for our communities. I'm particularly appreciative of the Green Certification program, working with our Department of Environmental Protection, and all of the support that the chamber does, in particular for our veteran-owned businesses, with free training and other services to support those in our community, to provide them an opportunity to start their own businesses and to succeed. We have an outstanding business community here, largely because of the advocacy of the chamber and others who support them. 115 corporate headquarters with 100 or more employees here, 149 cyber companies, over 300 biohealth companies here in Montgomery County. And one of the most exciting things for me is 47% of the businesses that we have that are owned in Montgomery County are owned by women. And that is an outstanding number that demonstrates our leadership, and hopefully that number continues to grow in the future. So I'd love to ask Gigi Godwin, our tenacious and fearless leader of the Montgomery County Chamber, who has just brought so much for the past 13 years, to bring this chamber to the next level, to say a few words, and also introduce so many of her outstanding colleagues and board members who are here with us today. Gigi?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Council Member Friedson. I might have to do this because I'm not tall enough for that. And also thank you, Council President Navarro and members of the County Council, and congratulations to all of our new members of the Council. We're really excited about working with you because Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce has been working in partnership with our county to make it the place it is for the last 60 years. And we have a great legacy working together. We've seen huge gains in our infrastructure, working together to make transit happen, and metro funding, and the ICC, our built environment, working on Silver Spring and White Oak and White Flint and Pike and Rose and Bethesda, and so much of our county to make it the place it is. Strathmore, I remember when it opened, and we all advocated to make that happen. And of course, education. We're a huge advocate for MCPS's CIP and construction for all of our higher ed pals. And of course, we are the home of so much great work that happens in science and biotech, and of course, cybersecurity. Our companies are building artificial intelligence, blockchain technology. We are, in fact, the global gateway for solutions that are being exported to the world. So we're proud to be here. We're proud to have the county be our great partner for the last 60 years. We're looking forward to another great 60 years. So I am very proud to be standing here with my incredible team, and I want to just point them out, who they are, and then I'm going to introduce my board chairs that are here too. So Tricia Swanson, raise your hand so that you can see. She does our Vice President of Government Relations. Linda Kezian, who brings those great events that all of you have been to. Has anybody here been to our events? If so, Linda produces those. Barbara Ash, Executive Vice President, who talked me into coming into the chamber years ago in the first place, who runs all of our government contracting and also our foundation, which is where VIP lives. And with that, I want to then turn over to my, I'm going to acknowledge my board chairs who were kind enough to come today, and then I'm going to turn it over to my current board chair. So we're very happy to have Jerry Shapiro, former chair of Shapiro and Duncan, and very happy to have Charlie with us today from Innovative Business. Charlie Atwell you did this to me beforehand. You were teasing me. Innovative Business Interiors. Our interior environments are so important, of course. And of course, we have Jim Young, who has been the leader on all things having to do with Marriott, making sure that Marriott stayed here. Thank you, and you're a great chair. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my current board chair, Leslie Weber from Johns Hopkins. Leslie.
Thank you, Gigi, and thank you, Councilmember Friedson and Jawando and Reamer for your proclamation today. As Gigi said, we have been the advocates for business success in Montgomery County for 60 years. We're particularly proud in the last year for our work on a federal piece of legislation called the Runway Bill, which is actually giving more time to those small business contractors to grow into medium-sized businesses to where they can compete with the larger companies for important federal contracting. That's an example of the type type of good ideas that we love to work with legislatures on in terms of helping our businesses grow, to become catalysts for future success, to becoming catalysts for more great jobs here in Montgomery County that enhance our quality of life. So for the next 60 years, we pledge to work with you and your successors and their successors to really continue to get rid of those kinds of rules that impede business growth and to really help make sure that we can all succeed in the future. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to read this proclamation with thanks for everything that all of our businesses do and our chamber does to support those businesses to not only improve lives, but in some cases, in many cases, to actually save lives here in Montgomery County. Whereas the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce has been and continues to be the voice of businesses in Montgomery County and the region for 60 years, with a membership base representing a cross-section of businesses and with industry diversity amongst its board of directors. And whereas in 2017, the Montgomery County Chamber Foundation celebrated the graduation of its 1,000th graduate from the Veteran Institute for Procurement, a national program headquartered in Montgomery County that trains service-disabled and veteran-owned small businesses on how to succeed in the federal government workplace. And whereas, as a Montgomery County Green Certified business itself, the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce partnered with the Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection and Montgomery College to establish a Green Business Certification Program and holds green business forums throughout the year to expand marketplace knowledge. And whereas the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce has been chartered for 45 years to convene an annual Public Safety Awards Luncheon, which is the largest Valor event of its kind in the entire Washington metropolitan area. And whereas, in addition to the signature annual events and monthly membership events hosted by the Chamber, the organization is entering its 15th year of hosting the GovConNet Pathway to Growth Procurement Conference, an impactful regional procurement conference for small businesses. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland, hereby celebrates the 60th anniversary of the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce. And be it further resolved that the County Council recognizes the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce as the voice of Montgomery County's business community and wishes the Chamber all the best as they celebrate their anniversary. Presented on this 5th day of February, 2019, signed by myself and Council President Nancy Navarro. Congratulations, and you look awfully good for 60. Take a picture. If my colleagues could join as well in the picture.
Congratulations to the Chamber. Now we are on to our general business announcements. Ms. Lemarcy.
Yes, thank you. There is an addendum this morning. Added at the end of this morning's session is a proposed closed session for the purpose of consulting with counsel to obtain legal advice on potential litigation. And we also are announcing a public hearing that will be scheduled on March 12th at 1:30 on a corrective map amendment that was recently received. It's Amendment H-130 for the Tacoma Park Master Plan. No petitions were received by the council this week.
Thank you, Ms. Lemarcy. Also, the minutes for dates January 15th and 22nd, as well as closed session minutes for January 15th and 22nd were distributed in advance to all council members. Are there any corrections? Hearing none, then the minutes are approved. Now we're on to consent calendar. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Vice President Katz and seconded by Councilmember Rice. Okay, I don't see any lights, so all those in favor of adopting the consent calendar, please raise your hand. and that is unanimous. Okay, now we're on to item number 4, and this is an action item. This is on spending affordability guidelines for the FY20 capital budget and other general CIP assumptions. And I will ask the chair of the GO committee to report out on this item. It's a joke, everybody. I was just wanting to make sure everybody was awake. That's right.
They know when you talk to yourself.
In the third person. Ooh, that's scary. Okay. Well, want to first acknowledge the work of my colleagues on the Government Operations Fiscal Policy Committee, Councilmember Friedson and Katz. This item, as everybody knows, is something that we take on every year. This happens to be the amendment year for our capital budget. And so our committee met on January 24th. We did review these spending affordability guidelines for the upcoming budget cycle and also 6-year capital improvements program. The committee agreed with the county executive's recommendations on the spending affordability guidelines, but amended his recommendations on the revenue from the transportation tax and the school impact tax. On the general obligation bonds, the committee agreed with the county executive and recommended to confirming the current GO bond guidelines, which are $330 million for FY19, through $320 million in FY20, $310 million FY21, and then $300 million in FY22 through 24. While our debt indicators are headed slowly in the right direction, we still are carrying a significant amount of debt. It is something that we have discussed quite a bit and really need to continue to work on. By the way, I'm just going to summarize the recommendations, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Orland, as well as folks who are here from OMB and from the executives, to just expand on whatever I have reported. On the transportation impact tax, by a 2-to-1 vote, Councilmember Friedson and I recommended assuming $12 million annually in FY20 to 24, and to concur with the executive's recommendation for FY19. Councilmember Katz concurred with the executive, and on page 9 of the packet, you will find sort of the rationale for this. As Dr. Orland had included in our packet, the revenue from transportation impact tax is very difficult to predict because it does vacillate quite a bit because of building cycles. And so further uncertainty as to when credits are cashed in adds to that volatility. And revenues in the first half of FY19 has been around $7 million, which is on pace for $14.1 million if the second half of FY19 mirrors the first half. So, with that, basically, rather than trying to guesstimate the future building cycles and timing of credits, the better approach is to apply somewhat conservative estimate and apply it over each of the 6 years. Of course, council staff does say that, they will re-examine the actual collections in early May as part of the CIP reconciliation. And so that's why we assume the $12 million annually, and then concur with the executive for FY19. The other item where we also had different opinions was regarding the school impact taxes. And the county executive recommended writing down school impact taxes by $120 million over the 6-year period, which is a 50% reduction from the original FY19 to 24 assumption. Reasons cited for this drop, as it was also analyzed by council staff, it's about 25% or about 30 million over, I'm sorry, I just can't concentrate, I'm sorry. Please. So 25% or about 30 million over the 6-year period of the write-down is because of market rate unit exemptions. Most of the reduction was also due to general downturn in residential and commercial construction. And the assumption is also that the downturn would continue from FY19 to 24. So we on the, also a greater percentage of the housing being built is comprised of high-rise units, which pay a much lower impact tax per unit. So we had quite a in-depth conversation about these assumptions, as well as the impact of some of the legislation that we have passed regarding affordable housing units, and also what does the trend really signal for us. There was a lot of conversation about, do we want to stay with such a conservative estimate, understanding that we have a lot of needs in our CIP, although this is all about affordability and not need. There was a lot of conversation about, do we want to, approve this write-down considering the pressures that we have in our CIP? And a lot of it really, at least, for me personally, it was this notion that if we go ahead and, raise this particular assumption and recommend this particular levels for the transportation tax, and then projects begin to move forward, but then we don't realize these revenue levels, then that's a significant problem. Conversely, being so conservative didn't sit right either. So we decided by a 2-to-1 vote, Councilmember Katz and I recommended a slight lesser write-down for the school impact tax. So instead of 50-something%, we stayed around 45%, with slightly higher revenues in FY 21 to 24. So basically, FY19 would be 19,604,000, FY20, 18,720,000, FY21, 20 million, FY 22 to 24, 25 million each year. Councilmember Friedson recommended a higher level, and so his recommendation are approximately 34% less than the original FY19 to 24 assumptions. So I just wanted to share that with you. Again, the understanding is, of course, if revenues come in much higher, then we have an opportunity to address that, in a significant way within our CIP, but to think that, the revenues are higher and then they come in lower, and then we have already made all these promises or started certain projects that then we have to decide to stop and or modify seems not to be the way to go at this moment in time. So that's where the committee ended up. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Orland to add any significant other details, as well as Ms. Beck or anybody else, and then we'll turn it over to council members.
Sure. First of all, let me introduce us here. Mary Beck from OMB, the Capital Budget Coordinator, Dennis Hetman from Finance, and Rob Hagedorn.
I'm sorry,
from
can you
Finance.
speak closer to the microphone, because we can't hear.
Mary Beck, Dennis Hetman, Rob Hagedorn, from
Thank
OMB
you.
Finance.
Yep.
Ms. Nora, I just want to add one more thing. The committee made 3 recommendations that were different than the executive. You mentioned the transportation and school impact tax. The other one is park and planning bonds.
Correct.
Where the committee is recommending a slightly higher set of bond levels in years 21 through 24. It's basically about a 1% increase. We can talk about that if you'd like.
Yes,
but
please.
other than that, you gave a good summary.
Okay, Ms. Beck, is there anything you want to add before we get into conversation?
Yes, I think you hit on a lot of the highlights. One of the things that the committee did was recognize the risk factor. I mean, the bottom line is how likely do we want to be to getting our number versus being under. And I think that in particular, those early years are very important. As you said, we've got some major construction projects going, and we have a lot of inflexibility in the budget, in the CIP, with very large projects. For instance, Bethesda Station South, Wheaton redevelopment, a number of school projects, all the Purple Line related projects. And these are under construction, underway. And so if we set ourselves up to not plan, a little more conservatively, we risk having to go into some of our level of efforts because we won't have other options. We're not going to stop a construction job while it's midway. And those level of effort projects are critical to just keeping our core buildings functioning, both in schools and all the agencies as well. So I think that is something that we would want to recognize. I think the other thing is you alluded to some trends that we've seen in terms of perhaps more of a mix with multifamily. And I think that, again, we just want to be extremely cautious. We have a chance when we come into the next full CIP to look at this. You also alluded to the housing exemption, and that is something that we are intending to look at very closely. We'll be working with council staff on that. What we did find, there are a couple of projects, 2 approved projects, Bradford's Landing and Silver Spring Century Apartments in Germantown, and they will have waived taxes totaling $17.6 million for market rate units. 3 additional projects are in the pipeline that we know of with $10.1 million in foregone market rate units. Obviously, everyone wants to support affordable housing, but we have to sort of see what the per unit cost is coming out to and if this is the best way to do it. I think also some of you may have seen the Bethesda Beat opinion piece. I haven't had a chance to check some of the data, but there was park and planning unit count data that indicated downward trends. And so I think this is the challenge with this revenue source. Construction is multi-year projects. We have to get them started, not really knowing how much we'll have. So I think with that in mind and recognizing some adjustments that we needed to make to our approach to projecting these numbers, we felt they needed to come down. We felt there were some errors in the past numbers and just wanted to acknowledge that and not pretend that that wasn't the case.
I appreciate that. I also want to remind my colleagues that, we did have a lot of lively conversation about this particular bills trying to incentivize the production of affordable housing. In some ways, it's interesting because in some ways you can say it's been a success so far, but then of course there's going to be an impact, and there's this constant balancing because we know that if we are going to stay true to this policy goal of having more affordable housing coming to fruition, it's going to cost. And so how do you address that cost, and what is the best way to incentivize that? So there is that conversation that we're going to have to engage as well. But interestingly enough, it's one of those issues where many of us didn't think that even doing this would in some way be enough of an incentive, but it has been, and now we have to think through what's the impact on the other side. So that is just the nature of the work that we do. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President, and I just wanted to thank you and Council Vice President Katz. We had a really robust discussion on this in committee, which I think was a really important and appreciated exercise. Thank you to Dr. Orland, to OMB, and to Finance. I know a lot of work has gone into this and a lot of discussion, and that was certainly an extended discussion. I just wanted to kind of share my viewpoint on this and where I came down. I think it's important for the full council to be aware of it. My view is this is not a lot of data that we have, and we have a 6-year CIP with off years for a reason, and this is a drastic and I believe unprecedented action that we would be taking, making this type of cut between a 45% cut with the committee recommendation or 50% that the county executive did, particularly at a time that isn't as dire as we had, as we have had in recent years. And to take this type of drastic action without waiting for the new CIP, as you said, we had an opportunity to revisit this, and I hope we have a much more robust conversation perhaps than occurred last time, and that the council be given more guidance on some of these long-term trends as part of that process, and really be thinking through the effects of some of this legislation and many of the other factors. But we're basically talking about less than a year of data, and I tend to agree with my colleagues strongly and erring towards the side of fiscal caution, but I'm concerned that by swinging the pendulum this far in the other direction based on a very limited amount of data, it's too much too soon based on far too little. And that is my basic concern. I think my recommendation before the council was still a significant cut of 34%, which is obviously more than a third, which is a massive cut. I think that the trends that were discussed are not formal trends that have been shared as definitive long-term trends by Park and Planning. I've had considerable conversations with them, and I'm not sure they fully share the view that we have a full shift in multifamily and out of townhouses, for instance, which pay the highest proportion of impact taxes. And so I think there's a lot to revisit here and things to think about. But I'm afraid that in the interest of fiscal restraint, which I fully support and appreciate my colleagues on the GO committee for endorsing, we have taken it too far. And we have sent a message to, or will be sending a message to the public that we don't take these decisions with as much thought as our process is set up to, which is waiting for the CIP unless there is drastic economic factors that have taken place to require us to make drastic actions. I think there certainly are things that have happened in the economy that necessitate a write-down. I had put forward that write-down, but I'm concerned that the write-down that the county executive sent over was far too much, and even the one that that my colleagues on the GO committee put forward is too close to that one, although it is less. So I just wanted to share that perspective and the concern that if we had based this information off of far too optimistic assumptions less than a year ago, that we're swinging the pendulum too far in the other direction, focusing too much on the near term and making assumptions for the out years of this CIP where the marketplace is going to do things that we just don't know at this point, and we should revisit it, be prudent here, and then revisit it when the new CIP comes in with all of the factors that have been discussed here and in our very robust and thoughtful conversation that we had in the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Friedson. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you to the GO Committee for the robust debate. I viewed it with some popcorn at home and enjoyed it, and it was holding my little son, too, so it was exciting. I just want to also share my deep concern with this unprecedented, again, historic write-down. We are, later this evening, I know this is affordability, but we're going to have a hearing on the CIP where people are going to make their requests and their projects. And with $120 million, I'm still trying to figure this out, and maybe one of you can address this. I'm concerned that there's going to be things that they're going to be pushed off for a year or two that are in desperate need right now. And I would share Councilmember Friedson's concern that we have a 2-year CIP process for a reason, and we're going to be able to have a much more detailed, in-depth look at this next year. And I think to do this in a knee-jerk way would be a mistake, and again, send a message that maybe we weren't doing the right thing the first time. And I know we've got new members here, and I just think we need to worry about that precedent, because, what does this mean if we're swinging back and forth 50% each way? I mean, and I understand there's some initial data, 9 months plus or so, and you can respond if you want to this, but I just am very concerned that we're taking a little small piece of information and swinging the pendulum all the way back at the same time that we have serious need. And so go ahead and respond, but I have one other thing to say as well.
Sure. I think that it's not just a few months of data that's leading us in this direction. I mean, we've realized that last year's calculations were too optimistic. To put our heads in the sand and pretend that's not the case is not helpful. So we are saying that that's been a problem. We had assumed too high a collection rate. It's not fun to say that, but this is the reality. And we don't think that we should continue to program at those higher levels. So I think that that's an important factor. I think the other thing is we've got a couple of years of data here now. And I think that last year we sort of thought maybe it was just related to some prepayments and things would swing back, but they're not. And I think the other factor is the affordable housing adjustments that are now kicking in.
Which we could reconsider, of course.
Which we could, but we're not at that point yet. I mean, it's still the regulatory and legal framework for the moment. So, we could work through this in the next month or two, and then perhaps you'd have a reason to adjust this somewhat. But and some of these things, depending on when legal changes become effective, take a little while to impact. So I don't think it's just overreacting to a couple months of data. I want to make sure that that's clear. I understand your concern. You don't want to seem to surprise people, but I think we also need to acknowledge, I don't think there's a magic to last year's numbers, so
I agree with that, and I take your point, but what's the magic to the 50% cut then? I mean, you said other than the data that you're referring to, all of this has some level of projection, right? They're projections. So could you just help me understand a little more how you got to that severe of a cut?
Certainly. As Mary had mentioned, so what we were hoping was a one-year blip in 17 is looking to exactly mimic in 18. And if you take a look holistically of the 10-year averages for schools dating back, that accounts for the trough in the recession and then the recovery after the peak. It averages right around $24 million for schools. Also, with respect to transportation, over that same period of time, it's right around 12 million. So we go through our process and attempt to forecast something that's largely based on individual developer behavior, but what we're seeing in that forecasting process is a number that largely matches what these moving averages are over that holistic time frame. So when you see these numbers, they're not unreasonable, and they actually do track with the 10-year averages, but the difficult part is we need to account for what was incredibly low numbers in 2009, and then a recovery from that recession, very large numbers in 2014, and then a large amount of prepayment activity that took place in 2017 to get ahead of the higher rates. So we're doing the most comprehensive approach as we can to that, but that is something that we do want to relay, that these numbers aren't unreasonable, and they do track with the averages over a 10-year time frame.
And you said 24 million was the average
for schools, correct?
Schools,
for 10 years.
Even so, you were still well below that, obviously,
correct,
in the
correct.
projections here.
Correct.
And maybe I can add that if you include this year, which I think most of us realize that it's somewhere in the $20 million range, and you take the last 4 years, then 3 out of those are in the $20 million range, between $20 and $23 million. It's only the outlier that's really the high one.
Okay.
If I could add, the main difference here, try to focus the discussion, there's no disagreement amongst all three committee members that the executive's numbers is what we should be assuming for not only this fiscal year, but for next fiscal year. And in fact, there's not a whole lot of difference in FY21 either. The real question is projecting out to some degree the third year, but really the fourth, fifth, and sixth years out. My concern was, do we assume that this downturn in the economies and the building industry in the county is going to continue that long? Because it will have started in terms of impact tax collections in FY18. Somebody raised the point, like we've only had these numbers for a few months. The estimates that were developed for revenues for school impact tax and the others were actually developed by Finance in November of 2017. And so it's been, about a year, almost a year and a half. And by the end of fiscal year 18, which is the spring, we already saw the signs that we were getting quite a bit of a slowdown. We typically don't change revenue assumptions after this point in the year. So that's why we didn't do it. And again, there's the thought that maybe, this was a blip, and we found that it's not a blip. It is a downturn, and it's continuing. And so if your discussion here, I think if you focus specifically on the last 4 years, maybe really the last 3 years, is where the main difference is. Is this going to continue into the future or not?
Right. And Glenn, while you have your light on, just the council staff recommendation, which assumes FY19 goes up a little bit in 20 and then is, at 25 for the remainder. Is that still your position, or has that been changed?
I was listening to the discussion the other day. I probably would go lower in FY20 as well, maybe to where everybody else is. But I'd probably go a little higher in the later years. I think the 6-year total I've got is about right. But the sort of start of the discussion was that, it's really, really difficult. In fact, it's really impossible on impact taxes to come to any kind of real forecast. We're gilding a lily here. The building cycle is so variable. Transportation impacts particularly is because of the credit aspect of it. And so the better thing is to, for the later years after the first year at least, try to figure out what we think we're about to get and just assume a flat number. And if we're high in some years, we can probably make up the difference. If we're low in some years, that's good news. Try to be somewhat conservative. And so that's why I had 25 million across. I think the discussion the other day made it more nuanced, and I think I would more or less agree with FY20 being the 18,720. But
I appreciate it. Last thing I'll say is, I think we're right. We have more control policy-wise than others. Obviously, there's market factors that are going to happen in the out years, but we can actually, depending on decisions we make, change what some of those numbers are, i.e. the affordable housing policy that we'll talk about and other things.
Right, but Mary is absolutely right. I mean, the forecasts have to be done on what the current law
Yeah, of course. No, I agree.
And one of the things I pointed out in the packet was if in fact there is a bill that comes over and for some reason you think it's a good idea to change that, those laws, and it's in effect, if you pass it before this budget is finished, we could amend the revenues here.
Well, again, last thing I'll say, I think Councilmember Friedson got it right. And with his assumptions, which are still very conservative, still a 33.8, almost 34% write down. And I would want to move that we take up those numbers. Councilmember Friedson's recommendation.
Okay, it has been moved, and there is a second by Councilmember Hooker. Now we have Councilmember Reamer.
Okay, well, first I just want to step back for a moment, then I'll continue with the discussion from the motion, but I wanted to express appreciation for the committee's work and the chair of the committee for the recommendations and the county executive. I think one of the big issues here is the ongoing decline in the amount of money that we borrow, and that has been kept in this recommended capital budget. And I think that's probably the most significant fiscal issue for us in this context. And we're not commenting on it because you took it up in committee and you talked it through, but it's really important. And so I just wanted to compliment the county executive for that recommendation. I think it matters a lot, and I really concur with the committee, and I appreciate their sticking with that recommendation. It's not easy to put the capital budget on a downward glide with the amount of money that you borrow, but that's the circumstances that we're in, and I think it's really crucial that we stick to that because it demonstrates that we're serious about what we're trying to achieve fiscally. I wanted to just briefly say on the issue of the policy that we have about when development does not have to pay impact taxes because it's 25% affordable. I think it's a great policy. It's really achieving its goals. There could be ways to refine it and improve it. We'll see. And I'm happy to have that conversation. I do view that policy overall as a success, and the possibilities of buildings going up in downtown Bethesda that have 25% of the units in a high-rise dedicated under price-controlled, affordable units for 99 years, it would just be unprecedented and very valuable. So we'll take that conversation up in the coming months. And I also, a final just general observation, we hear a lot from some who believe that the county is beset by overdevelopment and wish that development would slow down. And I think what we're doing right now is we're wrestling with the negative implications of a projected slowdown in development, which results in a loss of tax revenue. There are real consequences to a slowdown in the production of new housing. Not only does it worsen the housing crunch that we're in by failing to add new supply into the market, which then cascades into bigger affordability problems in the middle and for everyone, but also we lose tax revenue that we need to achieve important objectives like school construction and new libraries and transportation infrastructure. And I have to comment, the executive's capital budget, Glenn, can I ask you, what is the percent change for transportation in the executive's recommended capital budget?
Oh, it's right here in the packet. It's on page 2. It's a reduction of 11.4%. It's $133 million.
So it's a very significant reduction in transportation infrastructure. That's a very significant consequence. People expect us to be working to improve transportation in the county, and this budget reflects a very significant reduction. I'm not sure if there was an alternative or not, but it's a big deal, and I think actually I think there is an alternative actually when I say that. A lot of that is infrastructure that really matters a lot. Pedestrian safety infrastructure in Wheaton, new metro entrances at White Flint and at Forest Glen, new protected bike lanes. There's a lot of transportation infrastructure that was removed from the capital budget that we need to move on. Whether your perspective is pedestrian safety or traffic management, those are big issues. So just again to say, from a distance, there are many really important topics as we get into the conversation about the assumptions. I concur with those who are concerned about overcorrecting. I think that we're wise to downgrade our projected revenue from development due to the market environment that we're in, but I think there's no need to get carried away with that. And I agree, this is a mid-year in the process, and so I think a kind of, again, let's not overcorrect for the problem. I would really prefer the council staff's original recommendation, and at least for the first 2 years. So, I think I'd like to make a friendly amendment. I support the motion, but I'd like to make a friendly amendment to go to the council staff's recommended numbers for the first 2 years, and then back to the council members' recommended number for the outgoing years, if the council member would accept that.
I'll accept that amendment.
Can we restate the amendment, because our clerk
Sure.
needs
And
to
I
have
want
the
to make sure I got that
specifics of it.
procedurally correct.
I think I know what you're saying. You're basically saying 19,604 in FY19, it's the same as executive. $25 million in FY20, and then.
And basically, you're on to Councilmember Friedson's.
Yeah, then 25 million
25,
FY21, $32 million a year from that point on.
No, it's not Glenn. It's Glenn's proposal for the first 2 years.
Except you asked me about 5 minutes ago whether I think Mr. Jawando.
You've gotten squishy on your recommendation.
Yeah, I think I'm squishy on my FY20 recommendation now.
Squishy
But in
is
terms of
where
what I
we're
had
at.
in the packet, you're absolutely right.
That I accept as stated.
Thank you.
So I think just to be clear then, going up to a $32 million is above the average, and that average was over a number of years when you did not have the affordable housing adjustments. So we have $17 million lost from 2 projects. I'm not entirely clear of the number of years, but if it's over 3 years,
Thanks.
that's at least $5 million lost.
The lost revenue from the affordable housing component is just a fraction. It's like less than a fifth. It's not the big picture here. I'm not sure why you continue to rely upon that.
I think one thing that I think everyone is taking for granted is that the prior numbers were correct. And we don't think they were.
We're not,
So
because
when
we're
you keep-
proposing to downgrade those numbers.
We are, but I think what you're doing is, we've set an average is, what was it, $24 million. A 10-year average is $24 million. That was over mostly a period where we had none of these other frameworks impacting revenues. And now we're talking about a $32 million.
Appreciate that. Again, is it a 10-year average that we should use? Is it a 6-year average that we use? If it's a 6-year average, it's a different number.
Yeah.
So factoring in the depth of the Great Recession with the peak of its rebound, is that more appropriate than factoring in the past 6 years? I'm not sure that there's a real answer there. I think either is acceptable. So, Glenn, comment?
Just so you can keep track of this proposal, 19,604, 25, 25, 32, 33, 32. It's a total of 165,604, which is a 31.2% write down. from the approved.
All right, and again, we can take this up next year as we do the full capital budget. We'll continue this conversation in the spring as well.
Okay, Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And so, this is interesting because we're kind of trying to play fortune teller here in terms of predicting the future, and it's very difficult, but it has significant consequences, and the consequences impact our CIP as a whole, which affect our schools as well as roads, many of the things that our community highlights as top needs. And so from that perspective, I'm always very cautious when we're going to say that we're going to adjust the expectations that our taxpayers have about things that are most important to them. Because we have an amendment that's before us, I had more generic comments, so I'm going to stick to the amendment. And, this is a bouncing ball, folks, and so this is what happens when we amend on the fly. So I apologize, Madam President, but, we just talked about this, but, this is how the sausage is made. I truly think that when we're looking at some of the out years, that there needs to be some flexibility beyond what the committee recommendation is, but I'm not sure that we need to go to the full tilt that Councilmember Friedson had recommended. And so I have another amendment that I'll put out there. I had written some numbers before that kind of try and strike the balance in the middle. And would say for fiscal years 22 through 24 that we actually do that at 27.5. So $27.5 million for those out years. And then because they're so far out, they actually give us the ability to adjust upward or downward depending on what happens. And it still gives us a conservative approach when it comes to some of those out years and projections, and but still gives us the flexibility in terms of hopefully not pushing out. I know, Glenn, and one of the things that I've been awfully concerned about is we oftentimes put a lot on the back end when it comes to our CIP, and so pushing things out of that 6-year CIP is the reason why I have sensitivity towards fiscal year 24, and certainly see that we need to have a little bit more than what the committee has put in. So I'm going to put that out there again. So the maker of the motion is Councilmember Jawando. So if I follow the bouncing ball correctly. So essentially what we'd be looking at, I'll restate each of the years. 19,604 for FY19, 25 for FY20, 25 for FY21, 27.5 for FY22 through 24. And so that would be my offering of a friendly amendment to Councilmember Jawando.
Yes, Ms. Lemarcy.
Mr. Rice, could you please repeat? I'm losing half of it, please.
Absolutely, not a problem.
Thank you.
So it's 19,604 for FY19, 25 for FY20, 25 for FY21, 27.5 for FY22 through FY24. It would be 27.5 each of those three last year.
And just to keep track, the total then would be 152,104, which is a 36.8% write down from the executive.
Not add any more sausage, and again, I apologize as well, Madam President. I will accept that amendment.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Councilmember Katz, I moved your.
Thank you very much, Madam President. This is about affordability and not about need. If this were about need, we can go 5 times as much on what we need. We do need a lot more. But this is about affordability, not need. Our thought process was well thought out, and we should not be irresponsible in trying to give someone in the public the idea that we're going to be able to afford more than what we're going to be able to afford. Our predictions over the last several budgets, in general, not just for CIP, obviously, but our predictions in general for these several budgets have always called for savings plans. We are pretending that we have money that we do not have, that does not come in. If we continue to make these promises and then ultimately cannot fulfill them, it is much worse than not making, than in the very beginning, not allowing it. I believe that the impact tax in general was wrong. I think those numbers should have been come in much lower, and that's what I supported when we discussed it at the Government Operations Committee. But I ultimately believe that the way that this has been, that the Government Operations Committee came out with it in general is the correct way. As I say, I don't agree with every part of it, but I'm going to vote for the committee recommendation. These amendments, to me, are just this side of being what I consider not correct in any way based on what we have seen over the last several years and what, unfortunately, we might see in the future. I think we are much better off to have, when we can actually know that the trend has changed, to come back and make these upward numbers. But at this point, we should not make any upward numbers. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam President. This is an interesting conversation, not having been at that Go work session, but I appreciate the dialogue and the information that's been presented to us. And I'll say at the offset, I don't want to keep doing this. Last week, we cut money out of the general operating budget because of problems with the budget, and here we are trying to forecast 1, 2, 6 years out, and not only are the proposals a bouncing ball, but the budget's a bouncing ball. And we keep setting people up for what might not happen. We all have lots of projects. All of us do, and I understand that. And a lot of those projects are really important for the community, whether they're schools or transportation or other facilities. But to revise this in this mid-year, which is unprecedented, but to take into account the downturn in funds that have been presented to us, I can't ignore that. And so I think the amendment that has just been offered and accepted, I think strikes the balance in which we're revising the proposal, but doing it in a more thoughtful way. So we don't have to keep having this conversation. And I say that with full appreciation of the Go Committee for doing its due diligence, sharing with us, and I don't have a crystal ball. And so I am taking the recommendation of my colleagues and of staff and trying to do what's in the best interest of this county. And at this point in time, I don't want to keep setting up individuals and communities, having them expect things from us that might not happen. And so I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate the thoughtful proposals, and I'll be supporting the revised amendment to try and strike that balance. But I urge caution as we continue moving forward, realizing we're not quite sure what the economy is going to be, locally, nationally, wherever. And let's just keep that in mind so we don't have to revisit this.
Can I just add a quick point? It is really important that you get a set of numbers, but I want to put this a little bit in context. The difference between, for example, what you're considering now, what the executive had, it's about over a 6-year period. We're talking about maybe a little over $30 million. The CIP as a whole is $4.3 billion, so we're talking about less than 1% difference here. It's 0.7%. It's not going to make a huge difference in terms of what's programmable and what isn't. So it's important. We have to have numbers to start with, but this isn't like a mega decision. And we do look at these things every year, frankly. Every year we do get from finance different forecasts, and we make revisions every year. Not as big as this one. I think that's what's different about this one in terms of school impact tax.
Thank you for pointing that out. I mean, we have had occasions in the past where there have been some write-downs in these particular taxes. And one of the most important decisions that we make really is setting the general obligation bond levels. And there have been times when we've had to come back and address that as well. The bottom line is that this is not a perfect process. And so if there's any illusion that somehow we here are not going to be in a position of coming back and adjusting, then I just want to say, please understand that that's just the reality, because we are depending on particular sources of revenue that are volatile and unpredictable at times and are influenced by things that we cannot control. So I think it's also important to make sure that the public that is hearing this understands that. The general obligation bond limits that we adopted, we are reaffirming those. That will continue. We do have some issues figuring out these levels, and quite frankly, one of the things that I will say is that, next time, let's have some options. I mean, we've done that in the past, because it is very difficult to understand what is that, perfect balance. I mean, as has been stated here, many of these proposals are not that different, really. The bottom line is, what numbers do we want to wrap our heads around, knowing that they are going to change? Now, the biggest question is this notion of, which we don't necessarily, I don't think, can predict, are we truly setting folks up to think that the revenues are going to be higher than they actually are, and then we have to come back and make some adjustments? That might happen, and it's not going to be pleasant, but it could occur. I mean, that is possible. I will also remind all of us on a bigger picture question that our debt service is $429 million, and that's a bigger picture conversation that we need to keep in mind. This particular item that we're talking about obviously is minuscule in comparison with what that means, but I think it is important to keep in mind because it informs our overall thinking and understanding of what it is that we're promising communities, and what kind of overall policy fights do we want to take on? Because at the end of the day, we are the ones responsible for managing all of this. We have the last say. And, when it comes to things like our AAA bond rating, et cetera, we need to make sure that we are as disciplined as possible. So I just share that. I mean, again, this particular item, it's minuscule, but to the extent that we all start taking this very seriously, because there will be, I think, some major decisions that we're going to have to make as a body, and it would be great if we could try to at least reach some consensus before we get to the dais and do the sausage making in the dais in this way. So I just want to offer that. So I have Mr. Albornoz and Katz, and then we will vote on this particular item. Mr. Albornoz, Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Madam President. This has been a lively conversation, and I greatly respect everyone's position on this. I will say the scars of having to significantly scale back CIP projects for recreation centers that were originally intended, I'm starting to feel. I'm also remembering instances in which we would open a facility and then had to wait almost a year before actually being able to open it. And so we obviously don't want to go back there. I agree in principle with my colleagues that it does feel like we've swung the pendulum too far on the conservative side. However, given that there is little disagreement that the next 2 fiscal years are what they are, and that we can adjust up next year when we take up the CIP again, I do support the committee recommendation at this time, but also want to be Captain Obvious here and talk about the need for us holistically to grow our economy, and that there has to be a comprehensive effort in partnership with the executive branch, in partnership with our private sector. And I agree with Councilmember Reamer in this notion that development is such a negative thing overall. We have to acknowledge that there are many communities in this county, in the eastern part of the county, in the northern part of the county, that are screaming for additional development and need it and want it and have the infrastructure to address it. And so we have to take, I think, a holistic view and not forget the forest through the trees here as we have this conversation. I do support the committee vote, but look forward and appreciate and respect my colleagues' friendly amendments, acknowledging at the end of the day we're talking about not a lot of money relative to the overall CIP. But we'll obviously probably have to have this conversation again next year.
Councilmember Bernas, I really appreciate you pointing that out. I mean, we are working right now on scheduling a session for the full council on economic development. I think that all of us here are very much aligned with what you just said regarding our need to focus to redevelop and revitalize every corner of our county. And so I appreciate that comment. It's something that our rating agencies actually asked about a number of years back, and it was great to be able to point to some of the master plans and the projects going on in different parts of the county, like Wheaton, like White Oak, you know. So this is something that we do need to take up, and I think that this council is poised to playing a very significant role in leading that. So we will start by having a comprehensive conversation, and then hopefully start to come up with some specific strategy around that, because we can't afford any longer to just be in this whole piecemeal, you know, type of approach to economic development. We have heard loud and clear what folks have said. I am kind of tired of hearing how bad things are. I am ready to make sure we roll up our sleeves and begin to make this happen. So I really do appreciate that, and you're right. These kinds of conversations have everything to do with that work that we must do. And so to that extent, I appreciate everybody's concern with that. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam President. You know, as I say, I support the committee's recommendation, but if I were going to vote for an amendment, it would be for Craig's, except for the fact that when I heard, and maybe I'm wrong, but on FY20, you said that should go to 25 million?
Right.
Well, I mean, here you're saying that next year would be better, would be 25, and then it goes to 20 in FY21? Is that what you're saying? You're saying 25. I believe candidly that 25 for next year is way too high. I mean, if it were anything and that was 20, maybe that would be much more reasonable. But to believe that we're going to turn around this problem that we have in the next couple months is to me is not going to happen. I mean, listen, I wish we would have all the money in the world. We don't. So I just don't believe those numbers are going to happen. So I think that's my greatest concern.
Can I just speak
yes.
to that? Because that is one of my concerns right now. From a practical perspective, in the new budget year in FY20, we will probably only have like about a $10 million set aside. If we end up in the hole on revenues, then we've only got $5 million to deal with whatever happens. And I can guarantee you there'll be some bridge that fails or some kind of cost project that's under construction that's had, you know, found rock and now has a cost increase. And then it ends up putting us in this mode of cutting things people thought were going to be ready to go to construction. So
Okay.
I have the biggest angst about 20 also.
All right, Councilmember Jawan, and then we need to take a vote.
Thank you for Council President, and thank you all for the consideration and the comments. I think it's important that we are moving in the direction of still a 36% write down. I understand your point about the next year, but it's still a significant write down. Obviously not in the overall CIP overall, but it could allow some things to get going that have needed to get going for a long time. And we need more revenue. I agree with Councilmember Albanaz 100%, 1,000% if we could say that. That we need economic development, but we need more revenue. We need to build affordable housing. We need to do all these things. And I just want to thank my colleagues for the thoughtful comments and the amendments to the amendments. And I agree with the Council President that we need to take this up in a more coherent way. And I pledge to you that we'll do that next time. But I just wanted to thank everybody for their consideration.
Okay, all those in favor of Councilmember Jawando's amendment as amended by Councilmember Rice, please raise your hand. And that will be Councilmember Rice, Councilmember Friedson, Councilmember Reamer, Hucker, Jawando, and Glass. All those opposed? Councilmember Albornoz, Katz, and myself, so the amendment passes. Any other discussion or comments or any other item?
I just want to make, is the council otherwise agreement with the committee's recommendations and all the other items? They agree with the executive and everything except transportation impact tax is a slight increase, and the park and planning bond
I don't see any
guidelines.
lights. Yeah, I don't see any other lights, so that's what I was asking.
Okay,
So is
sorry.
there any other discussions or any other item? Okay, with that, all in favor of adopting the recommendation as amended? Guidelines, and that is unanimous by all present.
All right, thank you.
With all here. Okay, so now we're on to item number 5, which is action on the 2018 National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, MS4 Permit Financial Assurance Plan. Mr. Levchenko is here to describe what this is so that we can take action.
Hello. Yeah, this item was introduced by the council a few weeks ago. It was planned to go to the committee, but because of some scheduling issues and because staff felt that did not have the controversy associated with it, we felt we could take it directly to the council. If it had gone to committee, I think it would have been on the consent calendar today. But with that said, this financial assurance plan is a state-mandated requirement that the council do every 2 years. It's related to the council's NPDES MS4 permit, its stormwater management permit, and it focuses on the county's impervious surface restoration requirements within that permit, and showing the financial capacity to meet those requirements. What's a little bit unusual in this case is the county is between permits. We are operating under an expired permit, our 2010 to 2015 permit, and we're waiting on the state to issue a new permit. So this is a bit of a square peg in a round hole, but it is required that we do it. The good news is that the county has met its impervious surface restoration requirements from its expired permit. You may recall that the county did not meet it on time, but we did arrange through the state, through a consent action, to complete that work, and that was completed by December 31st. So this financial assurance plan reflects the fact that we are, in fact, have met the permit requirements under our expired permit. Where it gets a little bit messy is what to assume in the out years, because we don't have an active permit to focus on. So what this plan does, and this was done in concurrence with MDE, is to show the cost implications of all of the actions that were done under the old permit that must continue to go forward. So those elements are shown. A lot of the commitments that have already been made are shown, but it's not accurate in the sense of what we will ultimately be doing under a new permit. That will appear in 2 years when we do have a permit to work under. So I would say this is the best we can do under the current circumstances to meet the state requirement for this financial assurance plan. It does reflect that we've met the conditions under our old permit, and it shows that we have had the financial capacity to meet that permit and do plan to have the financial capacity to meet all those elements going forward to continue to be in compliance with the expired permit. And I'll certainly be happy to answer any questions, but the other thing I'll note, or two other things I'll note, this plan does not in any way affect the requirements in the permits or the council's policies going forward. We did have a public hearing last week where you heard from several folks who had raised some concerns about the water quality protection charge, how impervious area is calculated, how the credits are calculated. Those are all interesting issues, but not relevant to the financial assurance plan before you today. And so I do want to emphasize that as well.
Okay, thank you so much. Chair of the T&E Committee, Councilmember Hucker.
I think our able staff has said it all at this point. I believe the whole T&E committee would have approved this unanimously, and I certainly think we just need to move forward and approve it at the council level. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I need a motion. Councilmember Hucker and second by Councilmember Reamer. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you. Great. All right, so moving right along to item number 6, and this is the appointment to the Board of Appeals. Council Vice President Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I would move that we approve John Cook as the member of the Board of Appeals.
Excellent. So there's been a motion to appoint Mr. Cook to the Board of Appeals. I see Councilmember Reamer's light. Councilmember Reamer.
Good nomination. I look forward to Mr. Cook's service. He really has an enthusiasm for this, and I know he'll be a quick study, and it's really good that he's going to step up and take on this responsibility. I don't know if he's in the room. He wouldn't need to be in the room, but appreciate his offer to serve.
Excellent. So with that, believe it's been moved by Councilmember Vice President Katz. It was seconded by Councilmember Jawando. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you. Okay, Legislation Day 3, Introduction of Bills. Bill 2-19, Health, Lead in Drinking Water, Schools. Lead sponsor, Councilmember Hucker. Co-sponsors, Councilmember Reamer and Councilmember Katz. Public hearing is scheduled for February 26th at 1:30 p.m. Councilmember Reamer. I don't know why you were still on there. Councilmember Hucker.
I'm always eager to hear from Councilmember Reamer. Thank you, Madam President. So, and forgive my cold here. Grateful to Councilmembers Reamer, Katz, Albornoz, Jawando, and Friedson at last count for co-sponsoring this legislation. As you all know, lead is a potent neurotoxin. It accumulates in our teeth, our bones. It causes irreversible behavioral and learning problems, and younger children are particularly susceptible to the health effects associated with lead. They include lower IQ, hyperactivity, slowed growth, hearing problems, hypertension, and anemia. In fact, it's been estimated that keeping lead out of children's bodies and brains would save more than 20 million IQ points among U.S. children and billions of dollars in annual costs that are associated with lead exposure. So why is this legislation coming up now? Because the Maryland General Assembly passed legislation in 2017 requiring all of our schools to test every drinking water outlet every 3 years for lead, MCPS. After the regulations were finalized, MCPS completed its testing as required in 2018, and now we have the results school by school and outlet by outlet. MCPS has been closing or fixing almost all, 97% of the school drinking fountains with lead levels of 20 parts per billion or more, which is the state's identified mandated action level. However, the state standard is outdated, and there is proposed legislation in Annapolis to change it. But there is no safe level of lead. According to the EPA, the CDC, the World Health Organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics, they all agree there is no safe level of lead exposure. So that's why Montgomery County should update our action level and establish a new standard that's more health protective than the outdated state standard. Both Prince George's County and D.C. have lower action levels in place than the state of Maryland does. So Bill 219 establishes an appropriate action level for Montgomery County. I hope you all agree we can't gamble with the health of our children. MCPS has done everything they're required to do under the state law to conduct the testing, and by replacing the outlets that show lead levels that exceed the current state standard, but that's not protective enough. They need our help establishing the right standard for our county. I've been in touch with them. I'm grateful for their support and their assistance with this legislation. We can't take any chances with the health of our children. We need to set an updated standard that's more health protective and contemporary for Montgomery County based on the best contemporary science. This time last year, we didn't have the data about the lead levels in the drinking water in our schools. Now we do, so it's our responsibility to take prompt action to protect the health of our children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and do add me as a co-sponsor. Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you, Councilmember Hucker, for taking the lead on this important piece of legislation. You said it all, 20 parts per billion, there's no safe amount of lead for our kids. And we've seen it around the country. We've seen it here in the state of Maryland. One of the most tragic cases was, of lead poisoning for our children was Freddie Gray. who ended up having one of these predatory settlements. And he was stolen money on the back end, and then ended up, as we all know, ended up losing his life in an interaction, a deadly interaction with police. And so these things have far-reaching consequences, and we should continue to be a leader here in Montgomery County to make sure our kids are safe. And I'm proud to co-sponsor, so thank you again.
Councilmember Rice, Chair of the Ed Committee.
Well, thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you, Councilmember Hucker. I think that this direction that we're headed in is certainly a positive one. I look forward to working with you in trying to figure out the best way to move this issue forward when it comes to especially the remediation piece. That's where a lot of my concern is in terms of from a financial perspective and ensuring that our schools have what they need to be able to enact the proper remediation. And so I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor. I think that we do need to have a discussion about the remediation process and talk about that piece of it, but think that this legislation certainly is positive and certainly prioritizes the health of our children in our schools. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. I originally hit my button to make sure I was listed as a co-sponsor, which I appreciate you listing me as. I want to thank my colleague, Councilmember Hucker, for introducing this piece of legislation. I think what has been said says it all, that there is no safe amount of lead for our kids. Keeping our kids safe is our top priority, and I think this is an important step in the right direction. I also wanted to note, as you mentioned, Delegate Jared Solomon for his leadership on this. He's the delegate who's introduced this statewide bill, one of our Montgomery County delegates and District 1 residents, I might add. But I just wanted to thank him for his leadership and you, Councilmember Hucker, for your leadership. And I'm proud to support and co-sponsor this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
So thank you, Councilmember Hucker, for your leadership for sure. Your staff did an absolutely fantastic job pulling this together, and I just want to acknowledge your tremendous leadership on all of this and our council staff team as well. We have aging infrastructure across the entire county. It's not just our school buildings that are aging. We also have senior centers and a number of other facilities, and so I think there's going to need to be a comprehensive assessment of lead across our public buildings, and certainly working with our apartment complexes to make sure that we avoid the crises that Councilmember Jawando alluded to, which is the worst possible example, but a very real one of how serious this issue is and how disproportionate lead impacts our more vulnerable populations. And so this will have capital implications, which I think we're going to have to assess as we go through. But given the age of many of our buildings across the county, I do think we're going to need to do more in that space to evaluate things like lead to make sure that we're looking comprehensively across the board.
Councilmember Glass.
Water is fundamental to our existence, and the school a child attends should not dictate the level of lead in their water. This is an equity issue. I'm glad you've put this forward, and I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor.
Thank you. Okay, Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you, Councilmember Hucker, for working on this, bringing it to us. I really appreciate this and support it. My two sons have gone through a school. My youngest is still there, Tacoma Park Elementary, that tested with a higher than safe lead level, and it just always left me feeling very uneasy. And so I think we need to figure out a more comprehensive solution than what we've been able to implement thus far. And I think this legislation will move us there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So with that, this bill has been introduced. Now, call of bills for final reading. We have Bill 31-18, New Home Warranty and Builder Licensing Amendments. The Public Safety Committee recommends enactment as amended. Council Vice President Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam President. This was introduced on September 18th, and I know that Councilmember Rice is also going to speak on this, but was introduced on September 18, 2018. And a public hearing was held on October 9th. Eric Friedman, who is here today, Director of Office of Consumer Protection, spoke on behalf of the county executive in support of the bill. The Maryland Building Industry Association also supported the bill. The Public Safety Committee work session was held on January 17th. The committee voted in favor of the bill with some clarifying amendments. Those basically were removing language regarding services, the service of process and notice of administrative hearings, and removing language regarding the builder and seller being jointly and individually liable to the homeowner for the warranty. The bill requires new home builders and new home sellers to register with the Office of Consumer Protection. The bill requires the new home builders and new home sellers to provide buyers with a new home warranty. This requirement will address the business model changes in the industry. And the bill requires the Office of Consumer Protection to administer and enforce this law, and it was unanimous by the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I do want to note that we did receive last night, quite late, an email from Ms. Amy Presley with some.
No, that was
No.
the next one.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's the next one. Okay, I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you, Chair Katz. I really want to start off by thanking a person who we all know, who was actually the impetus of this bill, and that is meteorologist Doug Kammerer. Doug Kammerer actually reached out to me with the plight that he had with a home builder who we subsequently found out was taking advantage of many families here in Montgomery County. And it's oftentimes assumed that those that are either well-known or connected aren't subject to being taken advantage of, and it couldn't be more untrue. Our Office of Consumer Protection, I really want to thank Eric Friedman, who rolled up his sleeves when subsequently after that meeting with Mr. Kammerer, I had a meeting with Eric, and Eric said, you know, this is something that I think we can tackle and fix. And Amanda Myhill, our staff, who's done an amazing job working with Bob Drummer, but Amanda, you are the lead on this in terms of really making this happen and come to fruition. And what it's going to do is make it easier for people who are having their number one investment, their home, their most expensive purchase in their life, be something that they can actually rely upon is going to be built and safe for their family. I mean, when the number of violations that happened as a result, things not being built to code or to spec, companies changing names and trying to do all kinds of things to game the system. And this bill is going to help give the Office of Consumer Protection the teeth to combat that. Just today, I just got a text message about a builder who shall remain nameless, who's actually changed their name once again. So I'll be sending an email to Mr. Friedman, and hopefully under the new powers that he has, we'll be able to certainly start working on these people who are trying to prey on people in our community. But I really want to thank you, Mr. Katz, and your Public Safety Committee for doing the due diligence and making sure that this bill is going to be a very strong protection for those who are building homes here in Montgomery County and who just want to have the assurance that folks will be behind them and be able to support them if someone is unscrupulous. And so I really want to thank each and every one of you for being a great partner in this and making this bill come to fruition. So thank you.
Thank you. Vice President Katz?
No.
Nope. Okay, so this is a roll call vote.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Jawando?
Yes.
Mr. Jawando votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Albornoz?
Yes.
Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes. Okay, that's unanimous. All right, now on to expedited Bill 37-18, transient housing, short-term rental license appeals. The Fed Committee recommends enactment as amended. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you, Council President. Okay, this is a very simple change. This allows for an alternative to going to court. You can go to the Board of Appeals, and that means that if you have a matter you want to protest, or if there's a license dispute, then there's a much more affordable way to have that issue addressed. So, you know, we know that there are many residents who are concerned about short-term rentals in the neighborhood, and it's important that anyone who uses short-term rentals, you know, puts their home or a room in their home on the market as a short-term rental, needs to really stick to the rules that we've adopted. And so this will allow a much easier way for those who are concerned about it to raise concerns and more affordably, you know, stay out of the courts. Don't clog up the courts. Don't have to hire expensive lawyers, and so on. Jeff, is that, did I get it?
It is. This situation was created where we didn't have this appeal when short-term rentals were created as a separate use from bed and breakfast. And it was inadvertently, I think, not included in this appeal procedure. The other amendment that the committee made was to allow 60 days from notice of appeal for the Board of Appeals. That's a more realistic time frame given the noticing that they have to do and the timing of their meetings.
Okay, thank you.
There's the committee recommendation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chair of the Fed Committee, Councilmember Reamer. This is the roll call vote.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Duwando?
Yes.
Mr. Duwando votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Albornoz?
Yes.
Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes, and that is unanimous. Okay, now on to Bill 40-18, secondhand personal property dealer's license. The Public Safety Committee recommends enactment as amended, and for that, turn to Council Vice President Katz, who chairs the Public Safety Committee.
Thank you, Madam President. This was introduced on December 11th, 2018. The public hearing was on January 15th. All 5 speakers did support the bill, and the Public Safety Committee work session was on January 28th, 2019. The bill will exclude personal property that is offered for sale only on residential property, and it's owned by a resident of that property. The bill would also provide that a secondhand personal property dealer license expires 1 year from the date of issuance, as opposed to current law, which has all licenses expiring on July 30th of each year, which causes an administrative burden to the department. The Public Safety Committee amended the bill to authorize the Chief of Police to designate a civilian employee of Montgomery County Police Department to issue a citation for violation. The Public Safety Committee approved the bill 3-0 with amendments and rejected 3-0, the expansion of the exemption to include auctioneers and an estate or downsizing sale held by a business at a commercial site. Ms. Presley did send correspondence, I guess we received it last evening, who wanted us to revisit that. But we did discuss it, and the police were in favor of not doing that, or the police were not in favor of doing that on a commercial site. They were concerned about the commingling of items. And it was pointed out during our meeting, the Public Safety Committee meeting, that an auctioneer could go to the property where the estate is being held, and an auctioneer could do that sale, but it would not be that they could bring it somewhere else. Following the committee, the issue of the sale of firearms in an estate or downsizing sale was brought to the attention of the council staff. Due to these concerns, council staff recommends an additional amendment to clarify that if an estate or downsizing sale includes firearms, the reporting requirements of the secondhand personal property law would have to be complied with. Their suggested amendment, as you see on page 5, is items of personal property that do not include a firearm that is offered for sale only on residential property and are owned by a resident of that property or a part of the estate of deceased immediate past resident of that property, that would not be allowed. So if you would like, I can make that as a motion.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded by moved by Council Vice President Katz and seconded by Councilmember Rice. So all. To add the amendment.
For the
Yeah,
amendment.
yeah. Maybe we should take that on. All those
Yeah.
in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous.
Okay.
Okay,
And the committee did suggest this at 3-0.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you particularly to Council Vice President for co-leading this piece of legislation with me. I'd like to thank my colleagues for their support on this common sense bill to loosen unnecessary restrictions on our small businesses. Thank you also to Council President Navarro, Council Members Reamer and Albornoz for co-sponsoring it as well. I'd also like to thank some of the key stakeholders that have gotten us to this point, the local small business owners who were truly the genesis behind this bill, who came and provided input at the public hearing earlier this month and testified in strong support of the bill. Furthermore, I'd like to thank the county agencies that have played a crucial role in the development of the legislation, working in a collaborative fashion. It really was a great opportunity for me to work together with all of you, and I'm very appreciative, particularly to Captain Michael Ward, the Police Department, Director Eric Freed of the Office of Consumer Protection, and to the Office of the County Attorney for all the collaboration throughout this process. The bill is a common sense bill to fix an issue facing particular businesses in the county that there are far more of than even I realized when we first set out to do this, which is fantastic. The broad nature of the language in defining secondhand personal property has caught a lot of these downsizing and estate sale businesses in unnecessary red tape, making it difficult to serve their clients efficiently and effectively, and for us to provide for the services that are needed. Bottom line is that this is an opportunity to be responsive to our small businesses that are truly the lifeblood of our local economy. It's about limiting the scope of well-intended legislation so it adequately protects the public, but does not inadvertently hinder our businesses from growing, our private sector economy, and thriving. This is a win-win, and I hope to have the strong support here of my colleagues and appreciate everybody for their support. And thanks again to Council Vice President for working in lockstep with me and allowing me to put forward this piece of legislation for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any more lights, so this is a roll call.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Jawando?
Yes.
Mr. Jawando votes yes. Mr. Hooker?
Yes.
Mr. Hooker votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Albornoz?
Yes.
Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes, and that is unanimous. All right, we're on to item 9, which is the district council session.
Madam President, if your indulgence, if I could just introduce two very important staff members to the council. You know, all the laws that the county council enacts are only as good to the extent that they're properly interpreted and enforced. And I just would like to introduce the two only supervisors in the Consumer Protection Office, Tracy Rezvani and Samuel Buo. Both are very accomplished attorneys. They're our only supervisors. Ms. Rezvani had a career handling private practice consumer cases for 20 years. And Mr. Buo came to us. We actually stole him from the state's comptroller's office, where he was an administrative hearing officer, and he was actually being promoted every 2 weeks. So we grabbed him, and these are the people that enable our office to enforce all the laws.
He has a better record there than I did.
We actually enforced about 9 laws, including this one and the one that you just voted on. So I didn't want to make sure you knew who's doing the work in our office.
Thank you so much for doing that. Thank you for everything that you do.
And if you have any stories about Councilmember Friedson, I'd like to hear them,
Yeah,
please,
we'd like to
please.
get that in writing, please.
Certainly didn't get promoted every 2 weeks. I can tell you that much.
Okay, so item number 9, introduction zoning text amendment 19-03, commercial residential zones, animal boarding and care. And I'm introducing this at the request of the county executive. We have a public hearing on March 12th, 2019. Mr. Science, anything you want to add to
No, this is just switching from limited use to a permit, switching from a conditional use to a limited use in mixed-use zones. This has not been a big item for the council. We've had 3 animal boarding places in the last 10 years, but this would make it easier for them.
Thank you so much. All right, and now action on ZTA 18-12, setback exemptions, fences. Fed Committee recommends approval. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. Apologize, I was distracting myself. We're on item 9C, the zoning change that the Fed Committee recommended. Correct, okay.
9B.
Thank you. 9B, just as, okay, this one's even easier. This proposed zoning change that the committee recommended 2-0, I believe Councilmember Joando was appropriately attending to his young child. This proposal allows a fence to be built to 8 feet as the default, or the by right, rather than 6 feet when you are confronting the purple line right away. And it's very simple. If you want to ask for more than that, you could, although the conditions under which you would get more than that are fairly limited. But I think there are many people who feel that whether they support or don't support the purple line coming, it's there, and so they're trying to grapple with that new reality. And this is a modest measure to allow them to screen their backyard from, and retain some of that family sanctuary that they previously enjoyed. And that is the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any lights for this, so this is a roll call.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Joando?
Yes.
Mr. Joando votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Albornoz? Yes. Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes, that is unanimous. Okay, now on to item 9, and this is action on ZTA 18-13, Regional Shopping Center Overlay Zone Standards. Fed Committee recommends approval. Councilmember Reamer.
All right, committee supported this zoning change. This is, to take a step back for a moment, this is a very interesting issue where we have our regional shopping malls that are, reimagining their approach to the built environment and how they attract people to come and spend time, and creating a different context where you're building kind of more of a street grid and creating an experience that is different from the enclosed mall of the past. And so we want our malls to continue to thrive, and we need to allow them some flexibility to design their buildings a little bit differently. And the success of the Wheaton Mall is essential to the success of Wheaton. The success of the Westfield Montgomery Mall is essential to the success of Rock Spring generally. So just to, again, from a distance here, this is part of reimagining the future of retail experiences, and it's something that is fairly urgent for us. And I think, as a side note, I think we'd all like to see something like this happening at the Lake Forest Mall, which is not a county zone, it's not on county land, but there's some big issues there. What this zoning change would do is allow a building to go to 90 feet if it has a gym, basically. So they can already put buildings to 150 feet if they are hotels or apartment buildings, but they were limited to 45 feet for certain other uses. So this would change that. Jeff?
It would also allow freestanding retail sales and service and structured parking at the higher rate. In the absence of this ZTA, it would be 45 feet.
Thank you. So it's fairly tailored instrument here to support a vision for the future of this mall that the property owners want to pursue. And a final point I want to mention, that even if we create this, we have some significant issues with school capacity in this area, and this project might not be able to move forward if we don't address that. It's not part of this zoning change, it's a different conversation. But to our previous conversation, they've got nearly $5 million of school impact taxes waiting to get paid that are stuck in a building moratorium that we're going to have to wrestle through, not only this school community, but others, and address those capacity challenges and figure out solutions so that kids can be in schools that are not over capacity, but also secondarily so that we can see good ideas like these move forward. Did I miss anything on the substance of this zoning change? No. All right.
If I may add before the council votes, anytime you get a memo from Jeff Zients, I would suggest that you take a look at the footnotes. Mr. Zients is legendary for his footnotes, and I don't think I need to say any more, but there's a good example here.
Was that a footnote to this conversation, Marlene? Okay. Not as funny.
No.
I know, Marlene. You should have come with a little humor there. All
Councilmember
right, next
Friedson?
time.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly come off of what Councilmember Reamer was saying. There was a little bit of misconception in the media reporting of the committee's decision on this that made it seem like this was a 90-foot change for the entire regional overlay zone. And I just wanted to reiterate what you said, but just note for those who are paying attention that this is a fairly restrictive zoning change for a very specific purpose, and was done for that intention for all the reasons that Councilmember Reamer said. And so I just thought that it should be noted, since that was the reporting from the committee, and I think it had kind of somewhat misunderstood what the zoning change would actually do, which is a fairly limited in scope ZTA for these particular regional overlays, regional shopping center overlay zones. Thanks.
Thank you for
if I will, the setback requirements from residential are still the same. If you're near the residential, you need 3 feet of setback for every 1 foot of 45 feet. That still exists.
And I'll just say, if the reporter didn't quite get that right, I probably accept some blame for that, because I was trying to explain the CTA while on the Bluetooth driving, home. So I might have missed a detail, but here it is. Thank you.
Councilmember Glass?
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to say that I think this is innovative. If you look nationally, malls have been dying for more than a decade now. And while there are secondary issues, as the Fed Committee Chair mentioned, related to this amendment, I think this allows the malls that we have to continue to evolve to accommodate our residents' new needs.
Thank you for that. I do think that, if anybody is keeping a running list, I think that this is another action that the council is about to take to facilitate really what he just described, a real changing landscape, not just in retail, but also in housing needs and vibrancy of some of our neighborhoods. And so I think that this is, again, one more little step that we are all trying to work on and support, while recognizing that we need to protect our neighborhoods. And in many ways, this creates that additional quality of life, vibrancy, et cetera, and amenities that our neighborhoods also are clamoring for. So again, I think these types of actions really add to that. All right, with that in mind then, this is a roll call vote.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Jawando?
Yes.
Mr. Jawando votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Albornoz?
Yes.
Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes, and that is unanimous. Okay, now I'd like to propose a closed session for the purpose of consulting with counsel to obtain legal advice and to consult about pending or potential litigation pursuant to Maryland Code General Provision Article 3-305 B7. Topic, pending litigation. It's been moved by Councilmember Reamer and second by Councilmember Katz. All those in favor, raise your hand. Great, we're adjourned. We'll be back tonight at 7:30 PM for CIP public hearing.